panel discussion called Voicing the Little Herd, showcasing books which contextualize topics that aren't often discussed with junior readers: identity, loss, and little-known aspects of Indian history. On the panel, we've got Devika, Cariapa, we have Suji, we have Aarushi, Chandra, who's an avid reader from grade 7 of this school, and Venita Coelho will be moderating this session. Devika Cariapa uses her background in history and archaeology to ferret out interesting stories for young readers. Her first book, India Through Archaeology, Excavating History, encourages children to explore Indian history through the lens of archaeology. It was awarded the Sahitya Academy's Bal Sahitya Puraskar 2019 and the Hindu Young World Good Books Award 2018. Her adaptation for children of William Dalrymple and Anita Anand's book Kohinoor, entitled The Adventures of the Kohinoor, won the Neve Book Award 2021 in the Junior Readers category. She's also the author of India Through People, 25 Game Changers, and Uncle Nehru, Please Send an Elephant, a non-fiction picture book which has been translated into 8 Indian languages. Devika calls herself a professional nomad, having wandered around the country for years and lived in 23 different houses. She has finally put down roots in Bangalore for now. Venita Coelho is an author and screenwriter. She's the winner of Sahitya Academy Award, Neve Award, and the Hindu Award, among others. Venita lives and writes out of Goa when not traveling in her caravan. And we've got Suji, who was an elementary school librarian from 2004 to 2019 in the US, China, and Malaysia, previous to which she was a systems librarian for the Smithsonian Institution libraries for many years. Suji served for 7 years on the Kuala Lumpur Librarian Network. In 2019, Suji took the leap into the field of service and sustainability education, a lifelong passion, along with a love of children's literature and teaching. In the fall of 2019, she joined Orenda Learning, an organization guiding young people in best practice service, and she co-founded a social enterprise called Make a Difference Courses, aiming to help students and teachers worldwide to enhance their global competence and sustainability via interactive online courses. She remains interested in literacy, working on building and supporting rural libraries in Indonesia and the Philippines. Please welcome all the speakers and the moderator. Sorry.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Have you all had lunch? Are you all going to fall asleep now? Okay, we're going to keep you awake. I'm really glad that we have Aarushi here with us today because she's a reader. Normally at LitFest, all the authors are on the stage, all the readers are in the audience. And readers are really important because a book is like, somebody says like a musical notation. It squiggles on a page until someone plays the music. And books are words on a page until someone reads them and it becomes alive in their imagination. So readers are really important. And that's why we're doing this session a little bit differently. We're making you part of it. So we're going to do a 10-minute discussion, and then we're going to open for 3 questions. Then we're going to come back and discuss and open for 3 questions. And that's the way we're going to go forward. And you better have questions, because if you don't have questions, I'm coming down in the audience with my mic and I'll have questions for you. Okay? So we're going to try and keep this nice and interactive. Okay, we have a very heavy-duty topic. It says, voicing the little herd, and there was a sub-line to it that talked about identity and loss and history. Okay, so the very first question I actually want to ask is, how important are stories in forming your identity? I'm going to start with Devika.
Okay, I hope you can hear me because
hold a little closer.
Okay, yeah. Closer. Yeah. So, because I write about history and archaeology, I'd like to talk from a historical perspective first. It's my belief that every one of us is a historical being. Whether it's our traditions, customs, even our genetic makeup, has come to us from centuries of choices and change. So what we are today is really a product of the past. So if we have to understand ourselves today, we have to be able to make those links to the past. And history is something that provides those links. So children find that they are born into a story that started long before they were born. Their identity is that, but they question it. They're naturally interested in history. I mean, I've lost track of the number of times that my own children have asked me things like, have you always been this old? Like, you know, like, where did you come from? Like, have you always been this way? For many reasons. So their natural curiosity is to find out where they stand in that march of time. Their identity is based on that. Their place in their community, in their country, in the world and in the march of time is based on their understanding of history. Now, you could leave that to the study of history. You could leave it to the academics of history. But the academics of history or the curriculum has its own constraints for the way it's taught many times, for what they put in the textbooks. So that's where stories come in. And I would like to say writers of children's literature, whether you're writing fiction or non-fiction, you try and bring stories to children that resonate with them. For instance, they can find out about characters that are just like them. There are people who are angry and jealous. There are people who are afraid. There are people who are brave. There are people who are cowards. It's not just all about these grand kings and queens and all these wonderful, you know, leaders who do wonderful things. It's also about failures and success. And these really resonate with children. And once they understand their historical identity or read about their historical identity, I think it's a way forward for them to also empathize a lot more. Where you understand historical incidents in the world, you empathize with people more, and you become a more informed citizen, and you're able to make better choices in the future. So stories, historical stories, from my point of view, are really vital in bringing that sense of an identity to a reader, any reader, young reader.
Aarushi, you're a teenager, and we're always trying to write books that help teenagers with various issues. Are there any books that you've read that you read and thought that, wow, I connect with that, that resonates with me, that makes sense to me?
I feel that, yes, I feel that when me and my friends read a book, we usually continue reading when we feel that the book talks about topics that connect to us. You know, when you read a book, when I read a book, I think that from reading this book, what am I going to gain? How will it help me become a better person, you could say? So I feel that when I read a book, it helps me find myself, my identity, if it talks about something that resonates with me, as you said. So a book that I've read that did, you could say, help me was there's a book called, I'm forgetting the name. It was a memoir written by a person in Africa about how they, from like a very poor society, they rose up and like they beat all odds, and they have helped people around them even though there was no one helping them when they were small. And even though that isn't my story, it connects to what my dad has told me about how you should keep trying even if there's no one by your side. So I feel that these kind of books help me, and that is how I feel it connects to my identity.
Okay. Suji, you're a librarian. Give us an overview. As a librarian, identity and stories, how do you see that working? What impact does it have?
I think as an elementary children's librarian, and I know that Nadine and Katie spoke to this quite a bit. So I was a huge nerdy reader when I was growing up, and I loved when I found a character in a book that either was like me or I wanted to be more like that character. And I think librarians can help students like Aarushi to connect with books where the topic is of interest to them. So as a librarian, you should always be reading, or listening to audiobooks if that's more your style, to, so that you can connect readers with topics and characters. And I think this is why fiction in particular, or even narrative nonfiction, is so important, and reading for pleasure, because I would love to ask all of you to just think back to a book or a character in a book that you felt either like, wow, this person is thinking the thoughts that I myself have thought, or I wanted to be Pippi Longstocking. I'll just admit that right up. And I loved her sense of adventurousness, and even maybe I wasn't like that. I wanted to be more adventurous, so it informed my identity. So I think as librarians, we can always seek to know the books in our collection really well, read, and know our students really well, and try to put the two together.
Even as a writer, and now as a parent, I finally realized, I mean, I wrote because I love writing, but I finally realized the importance of what I do very late in life. Because it struck me that what writers do when they write a book is they're teaching kids what it is to be a hero, who should be a hero. You know, you're teaching them so much more. A child reads a book, learns that lesson for life. And then I got a little nervous about being a writer because you stories shape identities in ways where they're actually reaching in and they're touching your heart, they're touching your emotion, they're touching your soul. So they're doing it at such a subliminal level that their importance is tremendous. Okay, the other question I wanted to ask was about Indian writing. When we say voicing the little herd, one of the things that is little heard are Indian voices. You know, as yesterday we had a session and one of the publishers says, if you want to find Indian writers and their books, you have to walk into a bookstore, go into the corner that's the darkest, look on the bottom shelf and you will find Indian writers, because that's where our books are. We're kind of swamped by books from the West. So, voicing the little herd, we are the little herd in many ways. But within the context of an Indian identity, what would you say are the little herd voices that we do need to hear? Devika?
Okay. Historically speaking, if I may use an analogy, history is like a vast mosaic. You know the ones I'm talking about, the pictures that are made up of tiny little pieces, and every piece is a work of art. But if some of those pieces are missing, then the mosaic remains incomplete. So in our history, if you looked at it as a great mosaic, lots of little pieces have fallen out. The voices of women, the voices of so-called Dalits, the voices of the indigenous people, very rarely told. They're all there. They're all there for the research. They're there. But slowly, there are people who have been researching and writing, and I'm very excited by the kind of books that we have now in Indian children's literature, whether it's fiction or historical fiction or non-fiction. For instance, if you read Devika Rangachari's books, they are informed by her deep academic study into the disappearance or she calls it the disappearance of women or the vanishing of women from history, which she has researched as an academic and then has put into her historical fiction for children. So her Queen series, the Queen of Ice, the Queen of Earth, the Queen of Fire, are about different women in history who've made such an impact. And in them you'll find, okay, feisty women, all right, but they're also women with a lot of flaws, just like every one of us. So you connect with them on a level of, hey, this is very cool, a feisty woman ruler, but also someone who could be me. So there are a number of, we can go on. The voices of children are never heard in history. But thanks to historical fiction, like there's a Duckbill series called Songs of Freedom, which talks about the freedom struggle from the point of view of children. There are, I think, 3 in the series have come out, and they're all absolutely wonderful books. So I think as children's writers, we can really get into those missing voices and make them speak.
Aarushi, are there any voices that you'd like to hear? any books from any perspective, some issues that your friends think are important? What would you like to see written about?
Many of my friends, they have this conception that since we are from India, we are Indian, the people from the West, say people from European countries, people from UK, US, Canada, they they are they think that sometimes that they are better people, they are more capable than you, maybe because of skin color, maybe because of their education. So when I like reading books where Indian kids, like mainly girls, because we are usually, I feel that maybe sometimes girls are not considered as good or as treated as well as boys. And so I like reading books where Indian girls prove society who think that, you're not good enough, you have to do this, you belong in the kitchen, wrong. There's a book called Unfair. It was in the last year's NLF shortlist, and it was about a girl whose skin color was not, she had a dark skin color, and her dance teacher told her that, you have a dark skin color, you can't really do anything in this field of art. And so she bought these creams that slowly started making white splotches appear on her skin. And then her mom explained to her the science behind why our skin color is the color that it is. And it made her realize that, it doesn't really matter what others think you are, as long as you know that you are capable of doing something, you can do it. Those are the books I like to read.
Wow, good choices. Suji, you're waiting to read us something, right?
No, I'm saying please don't make me talk now because I have a lump in my throat. Yeah, I think, well, I wanted to highlight some of the books and let them speak for themselves from the shortlist. And The Girl Who Was a Forest, one of the pages says that there is lots of rules for girls. Rules that say girls do not need school. Rules that say girls must marry early and start a family. Rules that say her caste is low and her family not good enough. Rules that say that she is too tall, too plain, too different. And I think we could add too light or too dark to that, or however you want to put, however that comes to us in so many hidden ways growing up. And so I think, yeah, there's a lot of unheard voices that in the books that we've been reading for the past many months as jurists and as kind of being new to the scene. I'm so proud of what the authors and what the publishing industry in India is trying to do. I know there's more farther that we can go to give voice to the members of different castes. And one area that is my specialty of sustainability education is voices that are never heard are from animals and plants and our planet, because it doesn't speak our language, but it speaks to us in many other ways. And I love to see books like Bumoni's Banana Trees is one of our shortlist, and speaking for those, like the Lorax said, the voice have no trees, so it's our duty to speak for them. So these are the directions that I'm recently seeing in Indian publishing and Indian literature, and I know there's a long way to go, but I'm really happy to see where it has come already.
Aarushi, I liked something that you said, which really resonated with me when you said that your friends think that maybe, people from the West are a little bit better. And that really is one of the things that as a writer that we battle. This, we were so swamped with media, with books, with films from the West, that it's important that as writers we write books that give our children a chance to have their reality reflected back to them, where they have books that have brown protagonist, he or she is a hero. You learn that you can be a hero. Because otherwise, you know, this is another form of colonization. This is a colonization of the imagination at the end of the day, where you're taught that that is better than this. So this really is one of the things that I'm so glad that all my fellow writers have taken up. And I'm so glad our industry, as you say, is growing and doing amazing, amazing work now. Okay, now it's your turn. We're looking for questions from the audience. Is anybody on standby with a mic? Put up your hands.
It
It's
doesn't
questions
have to
from
be
you or
about
questions
the
from us?
topic. It can just be about anything.
I wanted to ask Aarushi a little bit about how you come across books, and also specifically in your friends group, do you guys discuss books? Do you suggest books to each other? If so, on what basis or what kind of books come up when you talk about these? And also, even otherwise, by yourself, what are the ways in which you come across a book? Is it through your parents? Is it through your teachers? Like, how do you?
Okay, as a librarian, is this working? Okay. I actually spoke with Katie Day before this session because I myself, I know as a librarian, we have to constantly be looking for books, right? And as the topic is voices that are less heard, obviously it's harder to find those voices. They're less heard. There aren't as many books about them. And I said to her, Katie, how do we do this? Like, what are these ways to find these books? And of course, Katie's amazing. So she had a whole list, and I have to put my glasses on. She said, we can look at the websites of library associations, like the American Library Association, Canadian, Australian, but Indian as well. And we can ask our community. Like in international schools, we have parents from all over the world, but obviously here in this community, they're very well-traveled, well-read, well-written parents. Blogs, I think there should be a day every month where everybody just shares their favorite literary blogs or the favorite blogs of their favorite authors, or there should just be a day to share out about who do I love to follow to get more information about reading and who's on the list. There's awards from almost every country. We're here at one right now. Conferences often publish like good authors, good book lists. There's book lists a lot. And then there's book fairs. So that's a short list that I completely credit to Katie Day. And I think, I'm sure you all have lots of more ideas.
Okay, so you've given us the professional way to get recommendations. Aarushi is going to tell us how it works on the ground. Aarushi.
Voice from the ground.
So usually I don't know which book to read. So I go to the library and there are books on animals on the fantasy shelf, and then there are books on detective agencies on the mystery shelf, and then there are memoirs of people from places from Asia and maybe Africa, and like memoirs from them, and they are also really appealing. So usually when I pick up a book, I read the blurb, and if it talks about something, some issue, such as, racial discrimination, gender discrimination, then I usually pick it up. Another way I find out about books is when my friends ask me which book they think they should read, which book I think they should read. Sorry. And I have this one friend who says that she does not like fantasy, she does not like mystery books, she does not like books on animals, and finding books for her is very hard, and in the process I end up reading a lot of books, and which is another way I find books.
Thank you. In the context of voicing the little heard, it's also an adding to Suji. Within India, it is becoming difficult for us to make the many voices heard. Like in librarians, to stack these different books coming from various places, because this conversation of many Indias and having different voices. But also as authors, I want to ask that then is it do you at some point, Devika and Venita, find yourself at a position of difficulty to write about these little heard voices in places of you may have heard of or may have even witnessed something that you do want to write about, but this question of am I then the right person to tell this voice, tell this story? Because as we all know, like every story deserves to be heard and should be heard, and an author, everything and anything an author writes, you want needs to heard. But how do you make those little heard voices come forward? Because not every time a little heard, that story may not be in a position to tell itself. Like Jamlo's story, for example, Samina had to tell us that story. Jamlo couldn't, or anybody from Jamlo's community couldn't actually put the story forth. So then how do we bring this forward?
Okay, so I think one of the things that writers do is they look at issues and they look at people and say, we see you. Out of empathy. You see that person and then you become their voice. There's a series of books that I've done that are Suji based on animals. There's the Animal Intelligence Agency series. And that really came out of my love for animals. I mean, I have 11 dogs. And I just saw the way that people treat animals. And I was like, nobody talks for animals. I will speak for them. And for me, I don't hesitate on the brink saying maybe I'm not the right person to tell the story. I first need to get really angry. I'm always asked about inspiration. I say I never write books out of inspiration. Inspiration lasts 5 days. What are you going to do for the rest of the 360 days? So I write when I get very angry. So every time I get really mad, then I sit down to write and become a voice for that issue that has moved me so deeply. So I don't really think, am I the right person? And I don't think you should think, am I the right person? If there is something that has to be addressed, if a voice, somebody has to be spoken up for, step forward and speak up. At least they have somebody speaking for them, even if you don't do a completely fabulous job of covering it from all angles or being politically correct or whatever, speak up. Because you have the privilege of being a writer, and being a writer who gets published, it is at some level your duty to speak up for those who don't have voices and not hesitate on the brink. Devika?
I would find that question a little hard to answer because I write non-fiction, and it's specifically historical non-fiction. But the way I look at my research is I like to find things in there. When I say I ferret out stories, that is what I do, because I want children to see things or hear things that they will not hear in their history books. And that entails me looking at, I love to hear the story of the common person. It's not some, very celebrated, historically important figure. So when I look at, say, perhaps a hero stone, to me, that entails an entire chapter in itself. Because a hero stone is about common heroes. And all over the South, you find them just piled up in temples, under trees. And they commemorate everyday people who did brave things. They're carved. They look like little, milestones for those who haven't seen them. They're about this high. They're flat. And they're carved with the brave deeds of common men and women as well. Those who defend their villages against cattle raiders or invaders, or they've just done something terribly brave, and they've died in their brave attempt to defend their people. And then they go to heaven. So the top part of the stone, it's read from bottom to top. So on the bottom, you'll see these men and women fighting off their enemies. The middle part of the stone will show you them dying and then going to heaven. And the top of it will show that they've reached heaven and they're being received with great honor by the gods. And these are ordinary people. Sometimes their names are mentioned, sometimes they're not, sometimes there are inscriptions. There are also hero stones, this is for you, Venita, for dogs. Brave, loyal dogs, many of whom have been mentioned by name, because dogs used to go into battle with warriors, and they were hunting dogs that were trained to attack the enemy horse's knees. And they quite often died in battle, and the heartbroken, dog companion, human companion, would make hero stones for dogs. So there are many of those kind of stories that come out that tell you of other layers of history, other unheard voices. So the pets are heard, the
You have
common
to-
people are heard.
I can't tell you how much I love that story because I have two Kanni hounds,
There you go.
which are
Yeah,
trained to do exactly
which are
this.
trained, yeah. Some of them have actually been identified as the earlier strain of Kanni hounds. So that's an endeavor.
Third question, and then we come back to discussion. We have lots of hands. Okay. Man with the mic, you make the choice. Who you're giving it to?
Hi, can you? Okay, okay. So it's more of a thought that I've had. I don't think it's a real question. But when we talk about voicing the little heard, you know, what I was thinking was that what causes something to be little heard? What causes things or ideas or opinions to fall on the fringes? You know, why don't we really get to hear them? Is it because they're not really appropriate? You know, so what causes something to just fall into the sidelines and not make it to mainstream discussion or even discourse for that matter?
I think part of that is a power structure, really. I mean, like one of the stories that's up for an award is Jamlo Walks, which is about the migrants. You know, we as a nation stood by and abandoned people who were expected to walk 500 miles home. I mean, the government abandoned them. NGOs were doing what they could. And they were able to do that because they're powerless. They need people to speak up for them. And I think a lot of it has to do with power. Suji, Devika?
Suji? No, historically speaking, you know, there's that old term, history is written by the conqueror. So it's power again. Those who are in power will change. They will change. There will be histories written again which will change the stories that we are going through today.
Even in the field of sustainability, I mean, it's very clear that animals and trees and rivers can't speak for themselves, but relating to what we've heard about the power struggle is that as long as that there's those who will profit off of the exploitation of those resources, that their voices won't be heard.
Okay, to bring the discussion back here, I thought we'd focus on India and we just talk a little bit about, among voicing the little heard, what are the things that we're still not hearing? What are the issues that we're still not focusing on India that you think that maybe need to be focused on? Okay, so I'll jump in there for one. Yeah, when we were discussing this offline, one of the things I really wanted to focus was we don't see enough conversations about caste in stories. You know, caste is an everyday reality that we live with. And it's so little represented in the stories that are told.
You hear it theoretically, like you would hear about Bhimrao Ambedkar and what he went through. You would hear about various other leaders like Periyar who violently opposed any form of discrimination, whether it was gender-based or caste-based, in a very strong movement and a very lasting movement. It still lasts today, at least in Tamil Nadu it does. But on a day-to-day basis, those stories that will, again, the word is resonate with young readers, is possibly not enough is being done about that. Caste is definitely one of the, gender, again, you hear of gender speak. One of the things that was a revelation to me during some kind of research that I was doing is when I was studying history a very long time ago, and Noor Jahan, you know, the Mughal queen who was the wife of Jahangir, everyone of a certain age will remember her. She's always been painted as this great femme fatale, like she came and then she just, you know, she blinded the emperor dazzled him so much that he sort of handed over everything to her. But research now, there are scholars who've found information that has been hiding in books, hiding in documents, hiding in trade papers and so on, which now shows us that Noor Jahan was not just a highly intelligent woman, she was a highly capable woman. She was a dress designer. She set the trends for all the dresses in the Mughal court. She was a jewelry designer. She set trends that still last till today. Some of the jewelry we're wearing, it was designed by her. She was an absolutely ace markswoman. She went hunting. Nobody was allowed to shoot the tiger except the emperor. And he would often hand over the duty to her. And she shot like 4 tigers with 6 shots from the back of a swaying elephant. She was a businesswoman. She had trade ships rivaling the Portuguese. She sent out indigo and fabrics all over the world on her own name. Now, did we know any of this about Noor Jahan? Yeah. She was an amazing woman, so she was not a femme fatale. And Jahangir acknowledges in his memoirs that ever since she's come into my life, she's been, she's been the moderator in my life. I drink less, I do drugs less. Children, close your ears. But this is what he said. He says it. It's there, but we didn't see it all this time.
Yeah, I also think that we don't really have enough stories about people pushed to the margins. So I was so glad that Jamlo Walks is about, the migrants. We need more stories about tribals, about the ethnic minorities. I mean, while we're trying very hard to make voices heard, within that space, there's still so many voices that aren't heard in India. There's such a long way to go, really.
I just had a little thought about that, just from my jury experience, and you can tell I'm really excited because this is my first year. But one thing that I think would really help with the telling of these stories from different perspectives, marginalized from a caste perspective, is to focus on the storytelling, because sometimes when you're trying to give voice to an unheard population or sector of the population, the message becomes a bit hammered on the head, like I'm trying to achieve this purpose, and the beauty of the storytelling gets a little bit set aside. And I think if we could tell beautiful, heartfelt stories that tell the story of a person's life, and the issue almost comes second, then I think those stories would be shared even more far and more wide, because they're just beautiful stories.
I agree. Less propaganda and much more exciting story.
That people can connect with.
Olga, could we talk about indigenous people, because their stories are
Absolutely.
never told, and there again, the lady in front asked about who should get to tell the story. So last year's winner in one of the Neve, I think the young adult category, was Onga. Devashish Makhija, he's here. It's about a boy in the tribal belt, and the Naxalites and the mining lobbies and the politics, and it's a very, very searing account of a little boy who's living through that. Even as we speak, there are people living through that still in the tribal belts of India. So those are the voices that I really, I would agree with you. Don't question, just get angry and write the story, Be angry at injustice, write the story, for better or for worse.
Okay. Aarushi, out of the books that you read this year, out of the Neve collection, which ones do you really, really like? Which would you recommend to our audience?
I read the book. I think I know the books in this category, junior readers, the best. And I feel out of this, I like When the World Went Dark by Jane D'Souza the most, as it's about the pandemic, something really recent, something that is not over yet. And it was something I could connect to the most, as, we've lived through it. I live in a privileged society, so I've not really felt the gender discrimination, the racism as much as others. So I feel I was able to connect to Jane D'Souza's book more. That was one of my favorite books. Along with that, I also liked The Homework from the early read, the lowest category. I'm not able to remember the name. And that's just because of the humor. I really liked the way the main character imagined the rhinoceros and how it was disastrously wrong.
Okay, great. So we're going to do 3 questions, and then we are going to ask you for recommendations for books that you think fall in the little hurt category.
So this question, I am not sure whether directly relevant to the topic, but because the discussion is going on. So if we see the history books or social science books, most of the books are kind of biased or written from a particular perspective, right? It already has that bias inside the book. Are there social science books or history books where different sources are given and the interpretation is left to the readers rather than making that interpretation by the author himself or herself? So just wanted to know that. Thank you.
Devika, that one's for you. And I'm really sorry that you wrote off all history books and all social science books.
I'm actually
sure
a
there are
little
few that are
sad
okay.
right now. No, you know, the point about history is it's a discipline like any other. It has its own rigor. It has its own methods. You wouldn't get a physicist up here and possibly ask the same question, like, can you write a book on physics without any bias in it? History is a very rigorous subject. You cannot write with bias, with any intended bias. Biases will all creep in, of course, because they have over the centuries. But there is a rigor and there's a method to the way you research history. And those history books have not been put out just off the top of somebody's head. It has gone through a process of writing, research, deep research, writing, peer reviews, double peer reviews, and then it goes through, if you're talking about textbooks, they've gone through several boards. You know, examination boards like the CBSE or the NCRT, they have, if you see in the front of their books, I'm not sure that they're used in these schools, but they have a board of almost 30 people who have approved. And those are all serious historians. They're not just people who have read a few history books. They are serious academics whose life it is to look into primary sources, not secondary sources. They read Persian and Arabic and Urdu and languages like that, translate them, and make their judgments based on that. So I would say trust historians.
And
do trust them a little bit
and
more.
don't trust those who are rewriting history and deliberately and adding a bias to manipulate, you know, the history.
So,
Those
I
you
mean,
shouldn't
I
trust.
just, talking about history, a lot of people say things like, well, did you know? I didn't know about this dynasty and I didn't know about something else. Why has it been hidden? And my answer to that is because you were not paying attention in history class. Because we all learned those things. We learned. I'm pretty old and I have learned about all those dynasties that they think are missing from the history books. They're not. They're very much there. You were just not interested enough at that point. So I would say read and then read some more, do your research, and then perhaps take it forward from there. It's enjoyable. It's a good process.
Okay, we have 5 minutes left. I think we just managed 2 more questions. There's a hand up here. Okay, now, yeah.
Yeah, so my question is sort of a good segue from the history question. It's a more contemporary problem. I was wondering what all of your experiences with the effect of social media on hearing little heard voices or little heard stories, whether that's been positive or negative. And I think the question of bias also comes in here. What kind of bias comes through social media and whether that reflects in books?
You want to take that? Okay, I think social media is fabulously democratic. Anybody can have access to it. And I've seen several initiatives where little heard voices have come to the fore. There's an association in Goa that has spent the last 10 years training girls in villages. They give them smartphones and say, report the issues in your villages. It's been amazing. They've managed to get water connections, they've managed to get power, all of social media. So while there's a vast amount of social media which is very frivolous, which is focused on all kinds of stuff, it is a channel that can be used very effectively for little heard voices. So I'm all for it. You know, there's the bad social media and there's all the great stuff that social media does as well. As to bias, there will always be bias. People always come onto social media with agendas. The thing is for people to challenge those agendas, to tell the other side of the story. So if there are 100 stories, there should be 100 other stories also being told from people on the ground. So I think if you open the doors and let people tell their own stories and let them tell enough of that, you will start getting the bias corrected.
How do you make the books, how do you make the people buy the books of the little heard voices?
Wow, my God, that's a big question and a fabulous one. Please, some applause. How do you make people buy them?
Well, of course, I'm speaking from my previous librarian perspective. And I think one way is to have festivals just like this, where smaller publishers, people who are really dedicated to the spreading of the word through books, through literature, through even recommending the social media platforms or other ways of hearing these voices more. That's a start. So, there's a huge book fair over there, and that's spreading voices of people like Jamlo. So conferences, again, the same thing I said before. But I love that you're saying, how do we get them to actually buy it? And I wish I knew the answer to that a bit more.
As an author, part of the answer is to write those stories really well, to make those voices compelling, to make those voices speak so beautifully that you want to hear. So I think that's a really big part of it, is getting that voice out there in a very exciting manner. Then books live or fall depending on how well they're written and how well they tell the story they set out to tell.
And all of us should be out there spreading the word. We all have our LinkedIn, our Twitter, our friends, our book clubs. Spread the word. We can all help to sell these books that share these voices.
Okay, do we have to wrap up? One more question. Okay, absolutely last.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is a really great question, but it's been nagging me for a while. So when it comes to children's books, specifically below teenage readers, does talking about these kind of little heard voices and the serious situations that they go through, are we dumbing it down when it comes to children and decreasing the seriousness of it? I mean, like playing off of what the girl was asking as well. She was asking about how do we get them to buy it. Does that become a question that kind of influences the writer to make it more appealing rather than truthful?
I don't think that as a writer I dumb down anything, but what I try to do is speak at the level of my reader. So if I'm writing a book for 8-year-olds, I will try to speak in a way that that 8-year-old can understand. If I'm writing the same issue for a 15-year-old, I will obviously do it in a little bit more depth. I will do it with a little bit more complexity. If I'm writing for young adults, I will do it at a different level. So it's not about dumbing it down. It's about writing it appropriately so your audience can understand what you're saying. Okay? And the fact is that issues have to be approached at many levels and at many angles. What I understand today about an issue, I might not have understood 20 years ago, because I didn't have the context, I didn't have the reading, I didn't have the background, I didn't have the intelligence. So they have to be done at many levels. And there is absolute space for a picture book on gender, as there is for a big fat, 12-book series on gender. There's different readers and different ways that you appeal to them. And as to marketing, I don't think we should live in ivory towers saying, oh, I'm doing this wonderful pure thing, which is writing a book, I'm an artist. Because if you write the most fabulous book in the world and the only one who reads it is your mum and says, great, it's pointless. Your book has to get out there. And there's a point at which you have to put aside your my delicate plant writer persona and become hard-ass marketing persona and get out there and sell your book. Because there's a story is, as I said at the beginning, a story is only complete if there's a reader to read it. Otherwise, it's words on a page. You are our readers and you complete us. And we have to reach out to you. That's part of the job. Okay, so I think we should wrap up. Big round of applause for everyone here. Suji, Devika, Aarushi, thank you so much.